Hi guys, welcome to a place of stillness. Before we begin, I invite you to settle deeply into your surroundings. Let the world outside your door fade into the grey mists of memory. Tonight, we are not merely recounting facts from a dusty tome. We are journeying back, far beyond the fires of Mount Doom and the crowning of kings, into the long, silent centuries that the history books forgot. Most know Gandalf the Grey as the Pilgrim of the North, the friend of hobbits and the foe of some. But before the War of the Ring, before the Fellowship was ever a thought in the mind of Elrond, there were 2,000 years of wandering, 2,000 years of footsteps on paths that have since vanished into the sea, or been buried under the roots of mountains. Tolkien left us fragments, shards of light in his letters and whispers in his appendices. But the true depth of Gandalf's early life in Middle-earth remains a beautiful, intentional mystery. Let the embers of the fire burn low. Let your breath slow to the rhythm of the turning tide. We are going back to the beginning, long ago, when the Third Age was still young and the green world was wide and untroubled by the shadow of the necromancer. A ship arrived at the Grey Havens. It did not come with fanfare. There were no trumpets to greet it, only the soft crying of gulls and the rhythmic lap of the great sea against the white stone of Mithlond. Close your eyes and imagine that pier. The air is cool and salt-kissed. Certain the shipwright stands there, his beard long and silver as the spray of the waves. He watches as 5 figures descend. They do not look like lords. They look like old men, weathered by a sun that never set in the west. Among them was one clad in grey, leaning upon a staff of ashdot. This was Olorien in the west. But to us, he is Gandalf. He did not arrive as a conqueror. He arrived as a guest, a stranger in a land that was not his own. While the others of his order, the Istara sought out the high places and the green valleys of the east, Gandalf stayed a while by the sea. He felt the vastness of Middle-earth, the weight of its sorrows, and the fragile beauty of its fleeting lives. In those first few centuries, Gandalf was a phantom. He did not seek the halls of kings. He walked among the simple folk. He learned the languages of birds and the secrets of the trees. Can you hear the silence of those early woods? The way the wind hissed through the high pines of the blue mountains. Gandalf walked there, his grey cloak blending with the mist, a shadow among shadows. He was learning. He was listening. Why is so little written of these years? Perhaps because Gandalf himself did not wish it to be. He was a guardian, not a ruler. While Saruman the White studied the arts of the enemy and built for himself a fortress of knowledge, Gandalf chose the road. Think of the miles he covered. Imagine the soles of his boots treading the soft loam of the Greenway when it was still a bustling road of the North Kingdom. Imagine him sitting by the campfires of the early Dunedain, watching the stars reflect in the eyes of men who still remembered the fall of Nam. He was a gatherer of spirits. He did not give commands. He gave hope in the letters of Tolkien. There are hints that Gandalf travelled far into the south and the east, though he never stayed long. To the east I go not, he once said, but in the early days, before the shadow lengthened, he sought to understand all the children of Ilúvatar. He moved through the markets of lost cities, watching the way a mother held her child, the way a craftsman carved a bowl, the way the light died on the horizon. He was falling in love with the world he was sent to protect. He knew that to save a world, one must first know what makes it worth saving. He found it not in the crowns of gold, but in the persistence of the grass, the warmth of a hearth, and the laughter of those who have little but give much. As the centuries drifted by like leaves on a slow river, a change began to stir. The watchful peace was a time of quiet, but Gandalf was never truly at rest. He was the first to feel the cold prickle of the air when the shadow crept into Greenwood the Great Dot. Can you see him standing at the edge of that vast forest? It was once a place of sunlight and singing birds, but slowly the canopy grew thick and black. The spiders came, and the silence became heavy, not the peaceful silence of sleep, but the suffocating silence of fear. Gandalf did not rush in with fire and light. He waited, he watched. He entered the forest alone, a grey figure beneath the towering oaks. He walked where the elves feared to tread, his heart heavy with a growing dread. This was the time he began to suspect that the ancient evil had not been truly vanquished, but was only dreaming. He spent decades think of that. Centuries of your human life simply tracking the movement of the wind. He noticed the way the moss grew on the north side of the trees, the way the streams tasted of iron and bitterness. He was a detective of the soul, tracing the fingerprints of a darkness that had no name. Tolkien tells us that Gandalf had many names. Mithrandir to the elves, Tharkan to the dwarves, Inkinnis in the south. Each name represents a lifetime of work that no chronicler ever set to parchment. Imagine the halls of the dwarves in their prime, before the fire of the Balrog. Gandalf sat in those deep places, the air thick with the scent of stone and hot metal. He watched the dwarves delve, not for greed, but for the love of the craft. He smoked his pipe by their forges, the embers glowing like dragon eyes in the dark. He counseled them in secret, warning them of the dangers of digging too deep, of loving the earth more than the light. Think of his time in Gondor, when the white tree still bloomed in the court of the kings. He walked the libraries of Minas Tirith, when the scrolls were still fresh, and the ink was dark. He read the accounts of Isildur, his fingers tracing the ancient runes while the city slept around him. He was the only one who saw the patterns. He saw how the greatness of men was fading, like the glow of a sunset, and he felt the chill of the coming night. But he also found joy. He found the Shire dot in the middle of his long journey. He stumbled upon a small, green corner of the world that everyone else had overlooked. He found a people who cared for nothing more than gardening, eating, and the telling of tales. To the wise and the powerful, the hobbits were a footnote. To Gandalf, they were a revelation. He found in them a resilience, a hidden strength that even he did not fully understand. He began to visit them, appearing at their midsummer festivals with fireworks that tasted of stars and dragons. He became a legend in a land of peace, the wizard who brings the light. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, consider the patience of the Gandalf lived for 2,000 years in Middle-earth, before the events of The Hobbit. Imagine the weight of those years. The friends he saw age and pass away, the forests he saw fall, the kingdoms he saw crumble into dust. Yet he did not grow bitter. He did not grow cold. The secret of Gandalf, the part of his history that is most forgotten, is his humility. He was a mayor, a spirit of the same order as Sauron, yet he chose to walk in the dust. He chose to be tired, to be hungry, and to feel the sting of the winter wind. He wore grey because he was the mediator, the bridge between the white light of the west and the darkness of the east. He spent centuries simply being a friend. He would sit on a stone wall in the Bree-land and talk to a traveller for hours, just to understand the path of a wandering heart. He would help a lost lamb in the mountains. He would sing songs to the children of the Northmen, songs of a world they would never see. These are the journeys that matter. Not the battles won, but the hearts encouraged. Not the lore gathered, but the kindness planted in the soil of a weary world. The fire in our hearth is dying now. The shadows in the room are long and soft, stretching out to meet the night. Gandalf's life before the ring was a long, slow preparation. It was a meditation in motion. He was the fire that warms, not the fire that consumes. He was the pilgrim who knew that the longest journey is the one that leads us home. As you close your eyes, imagine Gandalf sitting on a high ridge, overlooking the mist mountains. The sun is setting, casting a long golden glow across the world. He leans on his staff, his hat pulled low, his eyes bright with a wisdom that spans ages. He is not worried. He knows that the dawn will come, even if he must walk through the longest night to find it. He is there, in the quiet places of the world, in the rustle of the leaves, in the sigh of the wind, in the silence before the first bird sings. Rest now. The history is safe. The paths are walked. The world is watched over by the grey pilgrim, and you are part of that story. Safe in the folds of his cloak, sleep, and dream of the green hills and the long, winding road that never ends. The fire has burned down to a deep, pulsing crimson. The room is still. Outside, the world is draped in the velvet cloak of night, and we are safe within the circle of our thoughts. We turn our gaze now toward the rising sun, to the east, in the common histories of the Westland. It is said that Gandalf did not go into the east. To the east I go not, he once famously declared. But these words were spoken in the twilight of the Third Age, when his task was centered upon the defense of the Shire and the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, in the deeper reaches of time, in those centuries of wandering that have slipped through the cracks of memory. The grey pilgrim's footsteps fell upon many sands that have since been swept away by the winds of RHN. Let your mind drift across the misty mountains, beyond the shadows of Mirkwood, and further still, past the inland sea of Ron, where the maps of the hobbits end and the great mystery begins. In the early centuries of the Third Age, the world was still recovering from the cataclysm of the War of the Last Alliance. The Istari had arrived, sent by the Lords of the West to kindle hope, while Saruman the White sought the centers of power and the blue wizards vanished into the vastness of the distant horizons. Gandalf the youngest in appearance, yet perhaps the wisest in spirit, chose to walk. He went east not as a missionary, nor as a spy, but as a listener. Imagine him crossing the vast, rolling steppes of the east. The grass there is not the soft, manicured green of the Shire. It is tall, golden, and sharp, singing a dry, whistling song as the wind rushes over the plains. There are no roads here, only the ancient tracks of nomadic tribes and the migration paths of great shaggy beasts that have no names in the tongues of men. Gandalf walked these plains when the stars were the only guides. He did not carry a lantern, for the light within, himped flame of Anna flickered softly, hidden beneath his weather-stained cloak. He sought to understand why the peoples of the East were so easily swayed by the shadow. He wanted to know the heart of the enemy's recruitment. Ground he moved among the men of the sun, people whose skin was bronzed by a relentless heat and whose eyes were perpetually narrowed against the glare of the horizon. He sat in their silk-tented camps under the vast dome of the eastern sky. Can you see the smoke of those fires? It smells of strange spices, of sandalwood and dried dung, rising straight into a sky that holds constellations unknown to the folk of the north. Deep in the heart of the east lies the Sea of Ron. a body of water so vast that one cannot see the opposite shore. It is a place of haunting beauty and profound silence. Gandalf stood upon those shores when the world was quiet. The water of the Sea of Ron is deep and dark, reflecting the shifting colors of the dawn like a bruised jewel. Along its edges lie the ruins of cities that predated the coming of the Naminorians, stone pillars, carved with the likenesses of forgotten kings. Half buried in the silt and salt, he walked among these ruins, his staff clicking softly against the weathered stone. He was looking for the remnants of the Avaratha, unwilling elves who, in the elder days, refused the summons to the west and remained in the wild places. In the whispers of the reeds and the sighing of the waves, he sought their lingering spirits. Tolkien hints in his letters that Gandalf's primary strength was Nerea, the ring of fire. This fire was not the fire that burns, but the fire that kindles the heart. In the east, where the shadow of Sauron had lain heavy for an age, the hearts of men were cold and fearful. Gandalf would sit in the shadows of their great tiered cities, cities built of sun-baked brick and decorated. With lapis lazuli, he would simply watch. He saw the way the darkness moved. It was not a sudden invasion, but a slow, creeping rot. It was the whisper in the ear of a king. It was the fear of the neighbor. It was the worship of the Lord of Ghosts. Gandalf did not fight these things with a sword. He fought them with stories. He told tales of the great sea, of the light that never fails, and of the inherent worth of a single, kind act. He was a seed sower in a desert. Most of his seeds fell on stone, but some just a few took root in the hidden places of the east, creating small pockets of resistance that would, centuries later, prevent the full might of Ron from overwhelming the west. Beyond the Sea of Ron, the geography of Middle-earth becomes a tapestry of myth. There are the Orocani, the mountains of the east, where the 4 other houses of the dwarves are said to dwell. Imagine Gandalf climbing the high passes of the Orocani. The air here is thin and tastes of iron. The peaks are red as rusted blood, glowing with an inner warmth when the sun hits them at dusk. He went there to find the kindred of Durin, the dwarves of the Stiffbirds, and the stone foes in the deep, subterranean cities of the east. He found a culture far removed from the dwarves of the Blue Mountains. They were a secretive people, wary of the wandering Grey One. Yet, Gandalf found a common language in the love of the earth. He sat with their mastersmiths, watching them work with metals that were found nowhere else source, that shimmered like liquid moonlight or glowed with a dull, subterranean heat. He warned them. He spoke of the nameless terror that slept in the foundations of the world. He felt the tremors in the earth that others ignored. While the dwarves delved, Gandalf listened to the stone. He knew that the shadow was not just in the air, but in the very marrow of the world. From the mountains, he looked out over the red deserts of the further easter lands where the sun rises like a wall of flame. It is said that in these deserts, the wind carves the dunes into the shapes of sleeping giants. Gandalf ventured into the fringes of these wastes. Guided by the stars of the south, the silence of the desert is different from the silence of the forest. It is a heavy, ringing silence that makes one hear the beating of their own heart. In that stillness, Gandalf meditated. He stripped away the distractions of his physical form and reached out with his mind, sensing the distant presence of the blue wizards. Alatar and Palando, were they still true to their mission? Or had they fallen, as Saruman eventually would, into the trap of wanting to rule? Tolkien's writings are divided on their fate, but in the heart of Gandalf, there was always a flickering hope. He searched for their traces a specific way a staff was used to ward off a storm, or a certain rhyme taught to the desert children. He found echoes of their work, but never their faces. They were lost to the vastness, perhaps becoming founders of secret cults or guardians of hidden oases. Why did Gandalf eventually turn back? Why did he leave the East to its fate and focus his gaze on the Shire and Gondor? As he travelled further east, the air began to change. It grew stagnant. The light of the stars seemed dimmer, as if filtered through a veil of ash. He realized that the East was not merely a place of people. It was the backyard of the Dark Lord. Sauron, in his long absence after the Second Age, had retreated into these vast reaches. He had built temples where no light entered. He had turned the ancient traditions of the Easterlings into hollow rituals of fear. Gandalf stood on a ridge overlooking a valley where a great temple of black basalt rose from the sands. He saw the smoke of the sacrificial fires. He heard the rhythmic chanting that vibrated in the soles of his feet. He realized then that he could not save the East by force. The roots of the shadow were too deep, wound around the very foundations of their culture. He felt a profound melancholia, weight that only the immortal can truly understand. He saw millions of lives being lived under the thumb of a lie. He saw children born into a world where the Dark Lord was the only God they would ever know. But he also saw the small things. He saw a young girl in a dusty village share her water with a parched dog. He saw an old man tend to a withered vine as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He realized that even in the heart of the enemy's territory, the spirit of the world, the secret fire, could not be fully extinguished. He knew then that his task was not to conquer the East, but to protect the West so that one day a light might shine bright enough to reach even these forgotten corners. The journey back was long. It took years, perhaps decades. Gandalf did not hurry. He walked through the changing seasons, watching the world breathe. He followed the great East Road as it began to take shape, watching the first stones being laid by the hands of men who hoped for a future of trade and peace. He saw the rise of the Northmen, the ancestors of the Rohirrim, as they began to tame the wild horses of the plains. He spoke to their leaders, whispering into their dreams about the nobility of the horse and the sanctity of the oath. By the time he reached the borders of the great wood not yet called Mirkwood, his hair had grown whiter, and his cloak was the colour of the rain. He carried with him the dust of 1,000 miles, and the secrets of 100 tribes. He never spoke of these travels in the councils of the wise. When Saruman talked of the East problems as if they were pieces on a chessboard, Gandalf would remain silent, puffing on his pipe. He knew that the East was not a problem to be solved, but a land of living souls, each one a flicker of light in the gathering gloom. The fire has sunk into a bed of glowing coals, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls of our sanctuary. The world outside is held in the velvet grip of midnight, and the only sound is the soft, rhythmic breathing of the earth itself. We have followed the grey pilgrim through the golden grasses of the east and the salt spray of the grey havens. But now the air grows colder. There is a change in the winter shift, so subtle that only those who have lived through the counting of ages can truly feel it. Tonight we move into the quiet years of the watchful peace, a time when the world believed it was safe, while one lone wanderer began to realize that the nightmare was merely waking from its slumber. Lay your head back. Let your limbs grow heavy, like the roots of an ancient oak. We are entering the season of the first whispers, For many centuries after the fall of the Dark Lord at the end of the Second Age, Middle-earth breathed a sigh of relief. The Great Plague had passed. The kingdoms of men were diminished but stable. The elves lingered in their hidden valleys, singing songs of the elder days to the casual eye. The world was at rest, but Gandalf was never a casual observer. Imagine him sitting upon a high, lonely tor in the heart of the Northlands. The sun is pale, a silver coin hanging in a sky of washed-out blue. He is not looking at the horizon with his physical eyes. He is looking with his spirit. He feels a heaviness in the air, a tension, like the silence that precedes a tectonic shift deep beneath the crust of the world. He begins to notice small, discordant notes in the symphony of the wild. A forest that was once vibrant with the chatter of squirrels becomes unnaturally quiet. A stream that once ran clear begins to carry a taste of copper and rot. These are not grand signs. There are no orc drums beating in the hills yet. There are only the whispers. Can you feel that unease? It is the feeling of being watched when no one is there. It is the sudden chill that passes through a warm room. Gandalf felt this more keenly than any other. He knew that evil of such magnitude as Sauron's does not simply vanish. It dissipates, clinging to the dark corners of the world like a persistent mist, waiting for the temperature to drop so it can thicken once more. The most profound change began in the Great Wood. For eons, it had been a place of light and green shadows, but slowly a sickness began to take hold. It started in the south, near the hill of Amon Lank. Gandalf journeyed there alone. He did not bring a company of warriors. He brought only his staff and his grey cloak, which now seemed to carry the weight of the rain-dashed clouds. Imagine the transition as he walked. At the northern edges, the leaves still whispered secrets of the spring. But as he moved south, the trees began to change. Their bark became black and gnarled, like the skin of a diseased giant. The light of the sun could no longer reach the forest floor. The air became thick, tasting of stagnant water and old, forgotten sorrows. Gandalf spent years in these woods, moving with a silence that surpassed the elves. He watched the spiders grow large and bloated, weaving webs that looked like the shrouds of kings. He saw the way the squirrels became lean and mean-eyed, and how the very birds stopped singing. He would stand for hours, leaning against a rotting trunk, his eyes closed. He was listening for the heartbeat of the woods, and there, deep beneath the rustle of the dead leaves, he heard it, a low, rhythmic thrumming. It was the pulse of a will, a dark, singular focus that was drawing all the malice of the world toward a single point. He suspected, even then, that the necromancer of Dol Guldur was more than a mere sorcerer. But the mind of the wise can sometimes be their own trap. He doubted himself. He wondered if his long years of wandering had made him paranoid. He was seeing shadows where there was only natural decay. This internal struggle, this quiet battle against his own fear and uncertainty, is a journey that no chronicler ever recorded. As the centuries of the watchful peace ground on, Gandalf's concerns spread beyond the forests. He began to see the shadow in the hearts of the living. He travelled through the small villages of the Dunedain and the settlements of the Northmen. He saw a growing selfishness. He saw neighbours who had shared bread for generations begin to lock their doors. He saw the rise of petty cruelties: a child throwing a stone at a bird for no reason, a merchant cheating a traveller with a cold eye. To anyone else, this was just the way of the world. But to Gandalf, it was the slow rot. He knew that the great enemy did not always need armies to conquer. He could conquer by eroding the spirit, by turning the fire of the heart into the ash of indifference. Think of the lonely nights he spent by campfires that offered no warmth. He would look into the embers and see the faces of those he could not save. He felt the burden of his immortality. He saw the beauty of the world so clearly, yet he felt the fragility of it more than anyone. He began to question his own mission. Had the valor sent him to a lost cause? Was he merely a gardener trying to stop a desert with a single cup of water? These were the whispers that haunted his own mind. He felt the temptation to turn away, to go back to the west, to the gardens of Lauren in the undying lands, where the air is always sweet and the shadows never lengthen. But then he would see something. A hobbit sharing a joke in a tavern, a ranger tending to a wounded horse in the rain, a flicker of light in the darkness, and the fire in his own heart, the flame of Anna, would flare up once more. He realized that his task was not to defeat the darkness alone, but to be the one who stands in the gap, reminding the world that the light still exists. Eventually, the whispers became too loud to ignore. The wise, the wizards, and the high elves begun to meet. These were the early days of the White Council. Imagine the atmosphere of those meetings. They did not take place in grand throne rooms, but in secret glades or high towers under the light of the stars. The air was thick with the scent of incense and old parchment. Saruman the White sat at the head of the council. He was magnificent, his voice like music, his logic as sharp as a diamond. He spoke of natural cycles and lingering remnants of old spells. He dismissed Gandalf's fears with a patronizing smile. He told the council that the shadow in Mirkwood was likely just a minor spirit, a ghost of the past with no real power. Gandalf sat in the shadows of the council chamber, his pipe unlit. He felt the weight of Saruman's certainty, and it chilled him more than the shadow itself. He sensed that Saruman was looking at the world as a scholar looks at a map, forgetting that the map is made of living flesh and blood. There was a profound loneliness in Gandalf during these years. He was the only one who felt the urgency in his bones. Galadriel saw it too, for her mind was linked to the deep places of the world. But even she could not move the council to action without proof. So, Gandalf went back into the wild. He became a seeker of proof. He spent decades tracking the movements of the black crawlers, the creatures that began to emerge from the holes of the earth. He studied the flight patterns of the crows, the Creebane. Seeing how they acted as eyes for a hidden master, he was a spy for the light, living a life of constant vigilance and deepening fatigue. His grey cloak grew more tattered, his beard longer and more tangled. To the world, he was just a crazy old wanderer. To the enemy, he was the only threat that truly mattered. One winter, Gandalf climbed the high passes of the Misty Mountains. The snow was waist-deep, and the wind howled like a wounded wolf. He reached the summit and looked out over the vast expanse of Middle Earth. In that high, frozen silence, he had a realization. The shadow was not coming from the outside. It was waking up from within. The world was tired. The memory of the great victories of the past was fading. People were becoming complacent in their peace. He stood there, a small grey speck against the infinite white, and he made a vow. He would not be the general of an army. He would not be the king of a nation. He would be the disturber of the peace. He would be the one who knocks on doors in the middle of the night. He would be the one who forces the world to wake up, even if they hated him for it. Can you hear the wind on that mountain peak? It is a lonely sound. It tells of the vast distances between friends and the coldness of the void. But in Gandalf's hand, His staff began to glow with a faint blue light. It was a small light, barely enough to see his own feet. But in a world of total darkness, it was everything. He began his descent. He was no longer just a wanderer. He was a hunter. He began to look for the Keitha, one thing that the enemy wanted more than anything else. He didn't know yet that it was a simple gold ring in the pocket of a creature in the dark, but he felt its pull. He felt the great needle of fate shifting, as the embers in our hearth turned to grey ash. Let your thoughts settle into the quiet of the watchman. Gandalf's journey through the whispers was a journey of faith. He had no certainty. He had no army. He had only his intuition and his love for the breathing world. Think of the patience required to wait for 1,000 years, to see the signs and be ignored, to feel the fear and keep walking. This is the true heroism of the Grey Pilgrim. It was not found in the fire of the bridge of Khazad-dûm, but in the long, cold nights of the watchful peace, when he chose to stay awake while the rest of the world slept. The fire has breathed its last flicker of flame, leaving behind only the soft, pulsing heart of the coals. The shadows in the corners of the room have grown long and soft, like the velvet folds of an ancient tapestry. Outside, the world has fallen into that profound silence that exists only in the deepest part of the night. The hour when the owls cease their calling and the wind holds its breath among the sleeping trees. Tonight, we follow the Grey Pilgrim into the places that time has tried to erase. Beyond the Shire, beyond the stone walls of Minas Tirith, there were realms of men that flourished and fell while the Third Age was still young. These were the kingdoms of the twilight places, of high towers and green meadows that are now nothing more than mounds of earth covered in wildflowers, or stones half sunk into the marshes. Gandalf was there. He saw the first stones laid, and he saw the last fires go out. Lower your gaze. Let the weight of your body sink into the earth, as if you were resting upon the soft moss of a forgotten valley. We are going back to the kingdoms that have been lost to the memory of the world. Before the North Kingdom of Arna was broken into fragments, it was a land of silver bells and white marble. But as the centuries wore on and the shadow of Angmar crept down from the cold wastes, the cities of the Dunedain began to empty. Imagine Gandalf walking the streets of Unminas by the shores of Lake Ninu. In its prime, it was a jewel of the north, its towers reflecting in the clear, cool waters where the stars seemed to bathe at night. But as the royalty of the north faded, the city grew quiet. Gandalf moved through these streets when they were half shrouded in mist. He did not walk with the stride of a lord, but with the slow, measured pace of a mourner. He watched as the gardens turned to weeds. He saw the statues of great Kings Isildur and Elendil begin to grow coats of pale lichen, their stone eyes staring out at a world that was forgetting their names. He would sit on the crumbling piers of the lake, watching the sunset turn the water to liquid copper. He was a witness to the slow fading. It is a gentle sadness, the way a kingdom dies. It is not always fire and sword. Sometimes it is simply the thinning of the blood, the loss of hope, and the quiet departure of families seeking safer lands. Gandalf was the one who gathered the stories. He sat in the libraries of the north while the scrolls were being packed away in iron-bound chests. He memorized the lineages of kings whose descendants would one day be simple trackers in the wild. He was the bridge between the glory that was and the survival that had to be. South of the Great Road lay the realm of Cardolan, a land of rolling hills and rich pastures. Now it is a place of dread, known only for the fog-shrouded barrows where ancient spirits stir. But Gandalf remembered it when it was a land of shepherds and small, fortified manors. Can you hear the sound of the sheep bells in the distance? The way the grass ripples like the sea under the summer wind. Gandalf loved the folk of Cardolan. They were a sturdy people, less lofty than the lords of Unminas, but filled with a quiet strength. He spent decades among them, often appearing as a wandering herbalist or a teller of fortunes. He saw the great plague sweep through the valleys, a cold wind that took the young and the old alike. He stayed in the villages when the healers fled. He sat by the bedsides of the dying, his hand resting on their foreheads, his voice a low murmur like the sound of a distant river. He couldn't stop the great plague of them. The wise have limits, but he could stop the fear. He brought a peace to those final moments, a sense that they were not dying in a forgotten corner of the world, but were part of a much larger story. When the kingdom finally collapsed, and the last of the princes of Cardolan fell in the defense of the Tern Gortha, Gandalf was the one who stood on the hills as the funeral fires burned low. He saw the spirits of the Barrows the Whites, sent by the Witch King, creep into the tombs of the honored dead. He could not cleanse them then. The time was not yet right, but he marked the spots. He remembered where the swords of the West were buried, waiting for a day when a small hand would find them in the dark. He felt the grief of the land itself. Have you ever stood in a place where you knew something great once happened, but the only sign is the way the wind sighs through the stones? That was Gandalf's life for 500 years. He was the keeper of the graves. If we travel further south, beyond the borders of Gondor, there were principalities and lordships that modern maps do not name. In the valleys of the White Mountains, tucked away in the creases of the stone, lived tribes of men who had never seen a hobbit or an elf. Gandalf found these people during his long winter journeys. These were the middlemen, neither high nor low, living in the shadow of the mountains. Their kingdoms were small, perhaps only a single valley and a stone hall, but their lives were as deep as the sea. Imagine a hall of dark timber, lit by a central hearth where a great log of cedar burns. The air is thick with the scent of pine resin and roasting meat. Gandalf sits in the corner, his grey cloak drying by the fire. He is the Incarnus of the south, a figure of mystery. The kings of these small realms would come to him for advice, not about wars or rings of power, but about the things that matter to the heart. Should they move the cattle to the higher pastures? Why has the spring been so late in coming? How can they heal the rift between two brothers? Gandalf answered them all with a profound patience. He knew that to these people, the survival of their village was as important as the fate of the world. He became a weaver of peace. He mediated disputes that had lasted for generations. He taught them the songs of the stars, simplified into nursery rhymes so they would never be lost. He saw these kingdoms swallowed by the encroaching woods or absorbed into the larger shadows of the east. He saw their halls collapse and their languages fall silent, and each time a piece of his heart went with them. He understood that the tragedy of Middle-earth was not just the presence of evil, but the fragility of the good as you drift closer to the shores of sleep. Imagine Gandalf standing in the center of a ruin that has no name. The walls are gone, replaced by thickets of hawthorn and briar. Only the floor remains, a mosaic of colored tiles, cracked and weathered by the rain. He looks down at the tiles and sees the image of a ship, or a flower, or a sun. He remembers the hands that laid those tiles. He remembers the laughter that once echoed off walls that are now air. He is the witness. That is the burden he carries. He remembers the blue eyes of a queen who has been dust for 1,000 years. He remembers the weight of a crown that has been melted down to make spear. He remembers the hope of a people who believed their kingdom would last forever. He does not look at these ruins with despair. He looks at them with a quiet, holy reverence. He knows that nothing is ever truly lost. The deeds of those forgotten kings, the kindness of those lost queens, it is all woven into the music of the world. It lives on in the shape of the hills and the temperament of the people, who still live in the shadows of the old stones. He sits on a fallen pillar and takes out his pipe. The smoke rises in a thin, grey line, joining the mist of the morning. He is at peace with the passing of time. He understands that the falling of a leaf is as much a part of the tree as the growing of the bud. The night is deep now. The coals are grey, and the room is held in a perfect, still peace. Gandalf's forgotten journeys were not just about maps and monsters. They were about the human heart. They were about the long, slow work of staying kind in a world that is constantly changing. He was the companion of the lonely and the guide of the lost. As you close your eyes, feel the weight of those centuries pressing gently upon you, not as a burden, but as a warm, heavy blanket. You are part of the continuity of the world. You are standing on the shoulders of all those forgotten kingdoms, all those lost kings who dreamed of a future where you could sleep in safety. The grey pilgrim is still out there, in the quiet places of your mind. He is walking the ruins of the past, making sure that the memories are kept safe. He is leaning on his staff, looking at the stars, and he is smiling at the beauty of the fleeting moment. The roads are still. The kingdoms are at rest. The stories are tucked away in the golden light of the afternoon suns of memory. The embers in the hearth have settled into a soft, rhythmic glow, like the steady pulse of a sleeping giant. The shadows in the room are no longer dark. They are a deep, comforting indigo, wrapping around the corners of our world like a soft, woolen blanket. Outside, the great wheel of the stars turns in absolute silence, and the air is heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and cooling stone. Tonight, we do not travel across maps of sand or forest. We travel inward, into the silent, vast architecture of a spirit. We seek to understand the choice that defined the Third Age, not a choice of swords or strategy, but the choice of a heart. We look at the grey pilgrim, and we ask, why did he, a being of primordial light, choose the dust of the road? Why did he choose the tattered cloak and the weathered face, while others of his kind reached for the cold, hard brilliance of a crown? Let your breath become like the wind in the high pines, slow, effortless, and deep. We are entering the sanctuary of the mind of Oloreen. Before there was Gandalf, there was Oloreen, a spirit of the West who dwelt in the gardens of Ermo. He was a creature of visions and dreams, one who walked among the elves unseen, whispering thoughts of beauty into their hearts. But when the summons came to go to Middle-earth, he was afraid. He feared the shadow, but more than that, he feared himself. Imagine the council of the Valar, where the five were chosen. Manwë, the Lord of the Air, looked at Oloreen and saw a fire that did not consume a flame that warmed. But Oloreen looked at the task ahead and saw the pitfall of power. To understand Gandalf, we must look at his brother, Saruman. Saruman the White arrived with a mind like a machine of polished gears. He believed that to defeat the darkness, one must match its scale. He believed that wisdom was a ladder, and at the top of that ladder sat authority. He clothed himself in white, the color that contains all others, yet often reflects only its own brilliance. Gandalf saw the ladder, too. He knew that with a single gesture, he could have commanded the kings of men. He could have bent the will of the world to his own, forcing it to be good. But in the long silence of his heart, he understood the great truth that Saruman forgot, that power, even when wielded for the best of intentions, eventually becomes the very thing it seeks to destroy. Think of the weight of a crown. It is not just gold. It is the weight of every life you command. Gandalf refused that weight because he loved the world too much to own it. He knew that to rule a thing is to kill its spirit. He chose instead the staff of the Traveller tool that supports, rather than a scepter that demands. Why did he choose grey? It is the color of the twilight, the color of the mist, the color of the common ash in a hearth. It is the color of humility. In those early centuries, as he wandered the ruins of Arnor and the shores of the great sea, Gandalf practiced the art of being small. He would often sit among the grass and watch the ants for hours. He would study the way the rain beads clung to a spider's web. He was teaching himself that the smallest things in the world are the most real. Saruman looked at the world from the height of his tower in Orth. From there, the people looked like dots, and the forests like patches of green. But Gandalf looked at the world from the level of a child's eyes. He knew that when you are high up, you lose the scent of the earth and the warmth of a hand. Can you feel the texture of his grey cloak? It is rough and stained by the road. It smells of wood smoke and rain. For Gandalf, this cloak was a shield not against blades, but against pride. It reminded him every day that he was a servant, not a master. He was a gardener of spirits, and a gardener must be willing to kneel in the dirt. He struggled with this. There were moments in the deep of winter when his bones ached and his spirit was weary, when the thought of a warm palace and a throne must have been tempting. He could have ended the wars with a word. He could have cleared the forests of shadows with a flash of his true power. But he didn't. He chose the slow, painful path of persuasion. He chose to wait. He chose to suffer alongside the ones he came to save. The most profound philosophical battle Gandalf ever fought was the one against the ring. Not just the ring of Sauron, but the concept of the ring. The idea that one will could dominate another. He knew that his own spirit was vast. If he had taken the ring, he would have become a beautiful terror, a being of such light and order that the world would have been perfect hand, perfectly dead. There would be no more mistakes, no more greed, no more wars. But there would also be no more freedom. There would be no more growth. Imagine him standing in the dark of his own mind, looking at that hypothetical version of himself. He saw a Gandalf who was worshipped, a Gandalf who was obeyed, and he turned away in horror. He understood that the beauty of life lies in its mésalliances, its failures, and its choices. To take away the ability of a man to choose poorly is to take away his humanity. This is why he loved the hobbits. They were the ultimate expression of a lack of ambition. They wanted gardens, not empires. They wanted beer, not blood. In the Shire, Gandalf found a reflection of his own solar place, where power was seen as a nuisance and kindness was the only currency. He spent centuries honing his humility as if it were a blade. He would intentionally stay in the poorest inns. He would listen to the ramblings of the old and the foolish, finding the gems of truth hidden in their simple words. He became a master of the long game, knowing that a seed planted in a quiet heart is more powerful than a decree shouted from a mountaintop. As you sink deeper into the stillness of the night, consider the strength it takes to be gentle. We often think of power as the ability to move mountains, But Gandalf knew that the greater power is the ability to stand still while the mountain moves around you. He was the anchor of the world. He didn't need to be at the center of the story. He was the ink that allowed the story to be written. In the letters of Tolkien, there is a sense that Gandalf was the only one of the Istari who truly remained faithful to his mission. Why? Because he was the only one who didn't let his ego get in the way. He didn't care about his reputation. He didn't care if history books remembered him. He was content to be a footnote, as long as the page was turned. Can you hear the silence of his wisdom? It is like the silence of a deep well. It doesn't shout, it waits. It offers its water to anyone who is thirsty, without asking for their lineage or their gold. Gandalf's humility was his greatest weapon against Sauron. Sauron could understand strength, and he could understand the desire for power. He understood Saruman perfectly, but he could not understand Gandalf. He could not comprehend a being of such vast power who chose to be a grey pilgrim. To Sauron, it looked like weakness. To the world, it was the only thing that could save it. Humility allowed Gandalf to see the potential in the broken. It allowed him to see the hero in the gardener, the king in the ranger, and the light in the dark. Because he had emptied himself of pride, he had room to be filled with the hopes and fears of everyone else. The fire is now a memory, a soft warmth that lingers in the air. The world is tucked away, and the night is a vast, open sea. In the end, Gandalf's journey was one of constant surrender. He surrendered his glory in valor. He surrendered his comfort on the road. He even surrendered his life on the peak of Zero. And in each surrender, he grew more powerful, not with the power of a tyrant, but with the power of a star. Think of him now. Not as the wizard with the fire and the sword, but as the old man who sits on a hill and watches the wind. He is at peace. He has nothing to prove and nothing to protect but the light of others. Close your eyes and feel that same peace. You do not need to be the master of your world tonight. You do not need to solve the problems of tomorrow or carry the weight of yesterday. Like Gandalf, you can choose to be a traveler. You can choose to be small. You can choose to let the world happen around you, knowing that you are part of a greater, beautiful design. The stars are singing their silent song. The mountains are dreaming of the dawn. And you are here, safe in the humility of sleep. There is no need for crowns here. There is no need for towers. There is only the breath, the dark, and the quiet joy of being alive. The fire has reached that stage of the night where it no longer crackles. It only hums a low, rhythmic vibration that resonates in the floorboards and the soles of your feet. The air in the room is soft, smelling of old cedar and the ghost of a summer rain. Outside, the trees are black silhouettes against a sky of diamond, and the world has folded itself into a quiet, silver sleep. Tonight, we step off the dusty roads of men and the red deserts of the east. We are going to the hidden places, the sanctuaries of light that the world has forgotten. We are following the grey pilgrim as he seeks the counsel of the firstborn, the elves. These were not meetings of politics or war, but meetings of memory, song, and a shared sorrow for a fading world. Let your mind drift like a fallen leaf on a slow-moving stream. We are traveling to the borders of the hidden realms. Imagine the journey to Imla. It is not a place you find by seeking it. It is a place that finds you when your heart is weary enough to need it. Gandalf would approach the valley as the sun began to dip below the misty mountains. He would follow the hidden marks, the white stones partially covered by heather, the specific way the pine trees leaned toward the east, As he descended the steep, winding path, the air would change. The heavy, stagnant heat of the plains was replaced by a cool, mountain breeze that tasted of melting snow and crushed mint. Can you hear the water? The Bruinen River is never silent. It is a constant, rushing lullaby that echoes off the canyon walls. Gandalf would pause at the edge of the last homely house, leaning on his staff, and listen. To the elves, the water sang of the great sea. To Gandalf, it sang of the passage of time. In Rivendell, he was not the grey wizard or the disturber of the peace. He was Mithrandir, the grey pilgrim, a brother in spirit. He would sit on the carved stone balconies with Elrond, the stars so close they seemed caught in the branches of the birch trees. They spoke in the High Elven tongue, a language that sounds like the wind through silk. They did not talk of the coming war, not at first. They spoke of the elder days. They remembered the light of the two trees. They spoke of friends long departed to the west of Gilgalad and Galadriel's kin. These meetings were a way for Gandalf to recharge his own light. Surrounded by the immortality of the elves, his own long, exhausting mortality felt lighter. In the heart of Elrond's house lay the Hall of Fire. It was a place of great peace, where a fire burned year-round, and the only business was the telling of tales and the singing of songs. Imagine the room, the high, vaulted ceilings, the tapestries that shimmered with woven moonlight, and the deep, comfortable chairs carved from the wood of trees that had seen the First Age. Gandalf would sit in the shadows, his pipe unlit for once, letting the music wash over him. The elves sang of things that have no names in the tongues of men. They sang of the shaping of the world, of the first dawn, and of the long, lonely watch of the stars. Their voices were not like human voices. They were like instruments of glass and silver, weaving a tapestry of sound that could make a heart break, with beauty and then heal it in the same breath. Gandalf used these songs to keep his memory sharp. He knew that the enemy worked through forgetfulness, through the blurring of history and the erasing of truth. By listening to the songs of the elves, he anchored himself to the truth of the world. He learned the secret names of the mountains and the hidden histories of the rivers. Sometimes he would add his own voice, a low, gravelly baritone that grounded the ethereal singing of the elves. He brought the stories of the road, the struggles of the short-lived men, and the stubbornness of the dwarves. He was the link between the high halls of the immortals and the muddy paths of the mortals. When the weight of the world grew too heavy, Gandalf would travel further west, beyond the Shire, to the ancient land of Lindon and the Grey Havens. This was a land of grey cliffs and white gulls, where the air was always salt-sharp and the sound of the sea was a constant heartbeat. Here he met with Círdan the shipwright, the oldest of the elves in Mid. Círdan was a being of immense stillness, his beard long as a waterfall, his eyes holding the reflection of every wave that had ever broken on the shore. They would walk together along the white piers of Myth. There were no songs here, only the rhythm of the tide and the creak of the wooden ships. Being built for the final journey, Gandalf and Círdan spoke of the straight road, the path that leads out of the circles of the world. They watched the white ships disappear into the west, turning into glints of light before vanishing. These meetings were Gandalf's most private. Here he could drop the mask of the wizard entirely. He could be Olorine again. A spirit of the west looking longingly at his home, Círdan was the one who truly understood Gandalf's fire. It was Círdan who had given him the red ring, Naya, saying, "Take this ring, master, for your labors will be heavy." but it will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself. Can you feel that warmth? The ring was not a weapon. It was a hearth. In their meetings by the sea, Círdan would help Gandalf stoke that inner fire. They discussed the movements of the great birds that flew across the ocean, the whispers that came on the west wind, and the slow, inevitable fading of the elven power in Middle-earth. They were two ancient guardians, sharing the burden of a world that was slowly moving beyond their reach. Not all of Gandalf's meetings were in the high houses of the Noldor. He also sought the Sylvan Elves of the Woodland realm and the golden woods of Lothlorien in the shadows of Mirkwood. He would meet with Thranduil's folk. These were a wilder people, more dangerous and more joyful. Their meetings took place under the giant oaks, by the light of bioluminescent moss and flickering lanterns hung from the branches. They spoke of the heart of the forest. They told Gandalf of the movements of the spiders and the darkening of the roots. With them, Gandalf was more alert, more animal-like. He learned the language of the leaves and the tracking skills of the forest wardens. He saw how the elves of the wood lived in a state of constant, graceful war with the shadow, never losing their ability to laugh and feast even as the darkness pressed in. And then there was Lorien. To enter the Golden Wood was to step outside of time. Gandalf would walk among the Melian trees, their silver bark and golden leaves creating a world of perpetual autumn and eternal spring. With Galadriel, his communication was often silent. They would sit in the high flet of Caras Galadon, their minds meeting in a space beyond words. They shared visions of what might be. They looked into the mirror of Galadriel together, watching the ripples of fate as they spread across the surface of the water. These meetings were the most intense, for Galadriel was the only one who truly perceived the full scale of the coming storm. They comforted each other with the knowledge that even if they failed, the light they had protected would leave a mark upon a world that could never be erased. As you sink into the deepest part of your rest, imagine the perspective these meetings gave to Gandalf. He was a man of many worlds. He carried the logic of the men of Gondor, the craftsmanship of the dwarves, the simplicity of the hobbits, and the ancient, starlit wisdom of the elves. He was a mosaic of 1,000 cultures. The elves taught him the long view. They taught him that 1,000 years is but a season, and that the victories of the shadow are always temporary. They reminded him that the stars are always there, even when the clouds are thickest. Think of the silence that followed those meetings. As Gandalf left the hidden valleys and the silver shores to return to the dusty roads, he carried a piece of that elven light with him. It was what allowed him to keep his temper when dealing with the foolishness of kings, and his patience when dealing with the slowness of the world. He was a bridge. He was the one who ensured that when the time came, the elves would not simply sail away and leave the world to its fate, but would stand one last time with the younger races. The fire is now a memory of heat, and the room is bathed in the cool blue light of the moon. Gandalf's secret meetings were the foundation of his strength. They were the moments where he remembered who he was and why he had come. They were the high places of his journey. As you drift away, imagine yourself walking a silver path through a forest of white trees. There is no fear here. There is no shadow. There is only the sound of a distant harp and the smell of evening flowers. You are a guest in the hidden valley. The elves are watching over your sleep, their songs weaving a shield around your dreams. You are safe in the continuity of the ages. The world is old, and it is beautiful, and it is guarded by those who love it. Let your breath be slow and shallow. Like the ripples on the Sea of Ron, the stars are fixed. The mountains are firm. The grey pilgrim is walking the borders of the world, and all is well. The fire has reached its final, most secret stage. The flames have long since retreated, leaving behind a kingdom of pulsing, orange embers that glow like the hearts of distant stars. In the room, the air is perfectly still, heavy with the warmth of the hearth and the deep velvet silence of the late hour. Outside, the world is held in the breath of winter, a vast white landscape sleeping under the cold, watchful eyes of the constellations. Tonight, we do not move across the map. We do not seek the halls of kings or the hidden valleys of the elves. Instead, we sit with the grey pilgrim in the longest part of his journey, the waiting. For 2,000 years, Gandalf's life was not defined by the moments of action that we know so well, but by the slow, silent centuries of the watch. He was a guardian of the threshold, a shepherd of the quiet hours, waiting for a shadow that he hoped would never come, yet knew was inevitable. Close your eyes. Let your heart slow to the rhythm of the falling snow. We are entering the vastness of time itself. Imagine, if you can, the sensation of time as Gandalf felt it. To a man, a century is a lifetime, a vast span of birth, growth, and decay. To the grey pilgrim, a century was merely a season, a change in the wind, a slight shifting of the dunes. The growth of a single great oak from a sapling to a towering giant. He lived through the long peace, those centuries where the world seemed to have forgotten the name of the enemy. It is easy to be a hero in the heat of battle, when the drums are beating and the stakes are clear. It is a far more difficult thing to be a guardian in the silence. Think of Gandalf, standing on the walls of a small watchtower in the north. He is there in the spring, when the first green shoots pierce the thawing mud. He is there in the summer, when the heat shimmers over the empty plains. He is there in the autumn, watching the gold turn to brown and the birds fly south. And he is there in the winter, his grey cloak heavy with frost, his beard white with the breath of the ice. What does a wizard do for 100 years of quiet? He watches. He watched the migration of the deer. He watched the way the rivers carved new paths through the valleys. He watched the lineages of Menda, where a certain spark in a grandfather's eye would skip a generation and reappear in a grandson. He was a collector of patterns. He saw how the world breathed, how it sighed, and how it occasionally trembled in its sleep. He was the only one who stayed awake, while the world dreamed of its own safety. In the middle centuries of the Third Age, Gandalf's work was almost entirely invisible. This was the time of the quiet protection. He knew that if he intervened too directly, he would become a master, and the peoples of Middle-earth would become children, forever leaning on his staff. So, he practiced the art of the nudge. Imagine him in a crowded market, in a town that no longer exists. He is just an old man leaning on a staff, seemingly half asleep, but his eyes are moving. He sees a dispute brewing between two merchants that could lead to a blood feud. He doesn't command them to stop. He simply drops a word, a joke, a small observation about the weather that breaks the tension and makes them laugh. The feud is averted. The peace holds. A century later, that peace allows a great scholar to be born in that town, a scholar whose maps will one day guide a king. Gandalf was weaving a tapestry of 1,000,000 tiny threads. He was the one who moved a stone from the path so a horse would not stumble. He was the one who whispered a dream into the ear of a tired mother, giving her the strength to keep her family together. Can you hear the silence of that work? It is like the work of the roots beneath the soil. You do not see them move. You do not hear them grow, but without them, the forest would fall in the first storm. He spent decades simply wandering the borders of the Shire and the Breland, ensuring that the big folk didn't stray too far into the lands of the little folk. He was a ghost in the hedges, a shadow in the high grass. He protected the hobbits from dangers they didn't even know existed, wolf packs from the north, or wandering spirits from the barrows. He did it without thanks, without recognition, and with a profound, quiet joy. There is a deep, gentle sadness in the watch. To be the one who watches over the fleeting lives of others is to be in a constant state of mourning. Gandalf would make friends with a family of woodsmen. He would sit by their fire, tell their children stories of the stars, and help them mend their fences. Then he would go away for a time perhaps, to the libraries of the south or the havens of the west. When he returned, the children he told stories to were old men, and the woodsmen were gone, their names carved on leaning stones in the forest clearing. He saw this happen 1,000 times. He saw the blossoms of the world bloom and wither. Bloom and wither. Think of the emotional discipline required to keep your heart open after so much loss. Saruman closed his heart. He turned to stone and cold logic because it was easier than feeling the sting of the passing years. But Gandalf chose to remain soft. He chose to let the grief wash over him like the rain, knowing that it was the price of love. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the moon was a silver sliver and the world felt infinitely old, Gandalf would talk to the stars. He would speak the names of those he had lost, names that no one else remembered. He kept them alive in his mind. He was the living archive of the common man. He felt the weight of the years in his staff. It wasn't just wood. It was a record of every mile he had walked and every heart he had touched. He was tired, not the tiredness of the body, but the tiredness of the soul that has seen the sun rise and set over the same sorrows for an eternity. Yet he never sat down. He never stopped watching. As the Third Age moved toward its final millennium, the nature of the watch changed. The silence became heavier. The first whispers we spoke of before became a low, constant hum of dread. Gandalf began to spend more time in the high places. He would sit on the peaks of the misty mountains for months at a time, motionless as a statue, his spirit cast out across the land. He was feeling for the pulse of the enemy. He noticed that the shadows were no longer drifting aimlessly. They were beginning to align. The malice of the world was finding a North Star. Imagine the patience of those long vigils, the wind howling around him, the eagles circling above, the stars wheeling in their cold celestial dances. Gandalf was looking for the unseen thread. He was looking for the moment when the waiting would have to end and the action would have to begin. He felt the rise of the power in Dol Guldur. He felt the strengthening of the orc tribes in the deep places of the mountains. He felt the cold breath of the ringwraiths as they stirred in their secret tombs. He knew that the world was about to change. The long peace was a fraying rope, and he was the only one who could see the strands snapping. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He simply tightened his grip on his staff and deepened his watch. He was like a captain of a ship who sees the barometer falling. He doesn't shout, he just starts securing the lines. As you sink into the soft embrace of sleep, consider the beauty of the quiet watch. We live in a world that values speed, noise, and immediate results. But Gandalf's life teaches us the value of the long wait. He shows us that there is a profound power in simply being present, in being the one who stays, the one who watches, and the one who remembers. He was the secret fire of A fire doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes It is most effective when it is a steady, quiet glow that keeps the frost at bay. He was the warmth that allowed the seeds of the future to survive the long winter of the shadow. Think of him now. He is standing on a hill overlooking the world. The stars are reflected in his eyes. He is not afraid of the dark, for he has lived in it for 2,000 years and found it full of light. He is not afraid of the time, for he has seen that even the longest night eventually gives way to the dawn. Let your own watch end for tonight. You have walked far enough. The roads are secure. The shadows are being monitored by a wisdom far greater than our own. You can let go of the need to protect, the need to worry, and the need to know. The world is in good hands. The grey pilgrim is awake. The wind is whispering through the grass, carrying the stories of the ages into the silence. The hearth is cold, but the heart is warm. The journey of the day is done, and the journey of the dream is beginning. The night is at its deepest. The air is perfectly still, as if the world itself has finally found the peace that Gandalf spent 2,000 years protecting. You are safe. You are held in the memory of the earth. The long centuries of the watch are not a burden for you to carry. They are the foundation upon which your rest is built. Imagine the grey pilgrim sitting at the edge of your dream. He blows a single, perfect smoke ring that expands to encircle the entire world, a ring of protection and peace. He nods to you, a slight smile hidden in his beard, and then he turns back to the horizon. The fire has sunken into a bed of deep, pulsing violet and grey. The room is wrapped in the softest of silences, the kind that only comes when the world outside has surrendered to the night. It is a time for reflection, for the honesty that lives in the shadows when the bright, distracting light of the sun has gone. We do not speak of Gandalf the triumphant. We do not speak of the wizard who stood atop the walls of Mundburg, or the one who cast down the Balrog of Moria. Instead, we look into the quiet heart of the pilgrim. We look at the long, lonely centuries. Before the ring was found, the years of the wait, and we speak of the things he missed. For even the wise can err, and even the immortals carry the heavy stone of regret in their pockets. Settle into the stillness. Let your breath be slow and shallow, like the ripples on a dark pond. We are going into the memories that Gandalf kept in the deepest folds of his mind. One of the most profound burdens Gandalf carried was the weight of what he chose not to see. For centuries, as the shadow grew in Dol Guldur, Gandalf allowed himself to be swayed by the certainty of others. Imagine him walking the darkened paths of Mirkwood in the middle years of the age. He felt the cold. He smelled the rot. He saw the black squirrels and the bloated spiders. And yet, when he sat in the councils of the wise, he allowed Saruman's golden voice to wash over his doubts. Can you hear that voice? It was like the sound of a cello, rich and persuasive. Saruman spoke of lingering remnants and natural decay. Gandalf, in his humility, often mistook Saruman's arrogance for superior wisdom. He doubted his own intuition. He looked at the evidence of his own eyes, the dying trees, the fading light, and he told himself that perhaps he was merely growing weary. This was his first great mistake, the mistake of silence. He chose to wait for a consensus that would never come. He allowed the shadow to take root for hundreds of years while he debated the nuances of lore. In the quiet of the night, during his later years, he would often think of the lives that might have been saved if he had only trusted his own heart sooner. He regretted the centuries he spent watching when he should have been acting. He saw the faces of the woodmen who died in the shadows of the forest, and he knew that their deaths were the price of his hesitation. We have spoken of his journeys to Ron, to the lands of the rising sun. But there is a sorrow attached to those travels that the songs do not mention. Gandalf went east to find the blue wizards, Alatar and Palando. He went to find his brothers, to bring them back into the fold of the mission. But the east is vast, a sea of grass and stone that swallows the names of men and spirits alike. Imagine Gandalf standing on a high ridge in the Orocani, looking out over a desert that glowed like a furnace. He saw a distant plume of smoke, or perhaps a flash of blue light on the horizon. He was tired, his boots were worn, and the salt of the desert was in his throat. He told himself it was a trick of the heat. He turned his back and began the long journey west. He never knew for certain what became of them. Did they fall into the darkness? Did they start cults of their own? Or were they lying wounded in a cave, waiting for a brother who never came? This was a lost chance that haunted him. He felt that he had failed the Valar by not finding his kin. He carried the loneliness of being the only active wizard in the north and west. But he knew that loneliness was partly his own making. He had chosen the safety of the known world over the terrifying vastness of the unknown east. He wondered, in the centuries that followed, if the blue wizards could have been the key to ending the war before it ever began. He regretted the paths he did not take. He regretted the fires he did not sit by. He felt the absence of his brothers, like a cold wind at his back, a reminder of the fragility of the mission they had all been sent to fulfill. For a long time, Gandalf's watch over the north was distant. He loved the Rangers, the descendants of the kings of Arna, but he watched them fade with a kind of detached melancholy. He saw the once great houses of the north crumble into ruins. He saw the line of the kings become a line of wanderers, living in tents and hunting in the wild. He saw them as a dying ember, and for a long time he did not try to stir that ember into a flame. Think of the centuries when the Rangers were hunted by the Witch King's servants. Gandalf was often elsewhere studying scrolls in Minas Tirith, or attending festivals in the Shire. He left the people of the Star to fight their lonely war in the shadows of the ruins. He realized, much too late, that he had nearly allowed the most important bloodline in the world to be extinguished through his own neglect. He had underestimated the resilience of men. He had seen them through the lens of their failures, forgetting that greatness can be forged in the fires of hardship. When he finally met the young Aragorn, the guilt he felt was profound. He saw in the boy's eyes the weight of 1,000 years of struggle that Gandalf could have made easier. He became a father figure to the boy, but it was a relationship built on the foundation of a quiet apology. He spent the rest of his life trying to make up for the centuries he had spent looking away. Perhaps the mistake that weighed most heavily on him was his delay in investigating the ring. He knew, in the back of his mind, that Bilbo's ring was not a mere toy. He felt the wrongness of it from the moment he saw it in the tunnels of the Misty Mountains. He saw how it affected Bilbo the thinness, the occasional flash of a different personality, and yet he did nothing for decades. Imagine him sitting on the bench at Bag End, blowing smoke rings and laughing at Bilbo's jokes. Beneath the laughter, there was a nagging fear. He told himself it was impossible. He told himself the One Ring was lost in the Great Sea. He wanted to believe in the peace of the Shire so badly that he blinded himself to the truth that was sitting in his friend's pocket. He allowed Bilbo to carry that burden for 50 years. He allowed the shadow of the ring to warp the heart of one of the creatures he loved most. He risked everything: the Shire, the West, the world, in a hope that he knew was thin. This was the mistake of comfort. He loved the Hobbit so much that he didn't want to bring the war to their door. He wanted them to have one last generation of peace. But in doing so, he nearly handed the victory to the enemy. The years he spent not checking the scrolls in Minas Tirith, not questioning Gollum, not testing the gold, those were years he could never get back. He felt the cold sweat of that realization during the Council of Elrond. He stood before the wise and admitted his delay, but only he knew the true depth of the fear that had kept him away. He had been a coward of the heart, choosing a friend's happiness over the safety of the world. As you drift toward the edge of sleep, consider the quietest regret of all, the words Gandalf never said. He was a master of the spoken word, but he was also a master of the secret. He kept his true nature hidden. He kept his fears hidden. He walked among men as a stranger, never truly allowing himself to be known. He regretted the distance he kept. He saw the way people looked at him with awe, with fear, with suspicion. He never told them that he loved them. He never told them that he was afraid, too. He played the part of the infallible wizard so well that he became a prisoner of his own legend. Think of his final meetings with those who would not survive the war with Boromir, with Theoden, with the countless soldiers of the West. He knew their fates. He saw the shadows around them, and yet he remained the master of fate, offering counsel but never the comfort of a shared tear. He carried a profound loneliness. He was the Grey Pilgrim because he had no home, and he had no home because he had chosen to be the world's guardian instead of its friend. In the long watches of the night, he wondered if he had traded his heart for his mission. The fire is nearly out. The embers are a dull, dark red, and the room is a sanctuary of soft, heavy velvet. Gandalf's mistakes are what make him beautiful. They are the cracks in the marble that allow the light to shine through. He was not a god, he was a spirit who chose to be human, and in choosing humanity, he chose the ability to fail. As you close your eyes, let go of your own mistakes. Let the regrets of the day fall away like dry leaves. You are not defined by what you missed, but by the fact that you are still here, still watching, still hoping. Gandalf learned from his sorrows. His regrets became his wisdom. His mistakes became the lessons he used to guide the fellowship. He understood that the only way to be wise is to first be foolish and to have the courage to admit it. The night is deep, the stars are silent. The world is at rest, and so are the memories of the Grey Pilgrim. He is not judging himself tonight. He is sitting on a high hill, looking at the moon, and accepting the path he took. The embers in the hearth have settled into a deep, pulsing crimson, the color of a dying star. The room is wrapped in a stillness so profound it feels as though the world itself has stopped to listen to the turning of a page. Outside, the wind has died away to a whisper, and the trees stand like silent sentinels against the gathering dark. We have reached the final threshold. We have walked through the centuries of wandering, the years of hidden kingdoms, and the long, quiet watch. Now we arrive at the edge of the storm, the final years of the Third Age, before the name Baggins became a cry of hope and a word of terror. These were the years of the tightening cord. To the eyes of a hobbit in the Shire or a merchant in Bree, the world seemed much as it always had. The beer was still cold, the harvest still came, and the sun still rose over the green hills. But for the Grey Pilgrim, these years were a slow, methodical preparation. He was a weaver standing before a great loom, pulling at threads that stretched across thousands of miles, feeling the tension rise in every fiber of the world. Lay your head back. Let the weight of your day dissolve into the shadows. We are going into the time of the great gathering. the season where the silence of the world became a bated breath. In the decades leading up to the great birthday party of Bilbo Baggins, Gandalf was rarely at rest. He became a shadow that haunted the ruins of the north. He was no longer just a visitor to the Dune. He became their architect. Imagine Gandalf sitting by a small, hidden fire in the ruins of Furnost. Across from him sits a young man with eyes like the sea Aragorn, son of Arath. In these years, their bond was forged in the cold and the rain. Gandalf was preparing him, not with lessons of statecraft or crown-weary lore, but with the hard wisdom of the wild. He was moving the most important piece on the board into position, yet doing so with such subtlety that even the spies of the enemy saw only a ragged ranger and a wandering beggar. He spent years strengthening the watch on the borders of the Shire. He moved the rangers like invisible pawns, creating a circle of protection around the land of the halflings. Why? Because he felt the great eye beginning to turn its gaze away from the high walls of Gondor and toward the quiet corners of the world. He could feel the search. It was a psychic pressure, a cold shadow that moved across the map. He knew the enemy was looking for something, a name, a place, a lost treasure. Gandalf didn't know yet that the word Shire was being whispered in the pits of Barad-dûr, but he acted as if it were. This was the silent fortification. He was building a wall of secrecy, brick by brick, year by year, hoping it would be enough to hide a small hole in the ground from the Lord of the Dark Tower. During these final years of preparation, Gandalf made his most fateful journeys to the south to Minas Tirith. But he did not go to the court of the stewards to feast. He went to the House of the Lost. Deep beneath the citadel of the White City lay the archives, rooms that had not been opened for centuries. The air there was ancient, thick with the dust of fallen empires and the smell of rotting parchment. The only light came from the guttering candle Gandalf held in his trembling hand. Can you hear the sound of the scrolls unrolling? It is a dry, rasping sound, like the scales of a serpent. Gandalf spent months in this tomb of knowledge. He was looking for one specific thing. The account of He was looking for the description of the ring. This was the time of his greatest internal tension. He was terrified of what he would find, yet more terrified of not finding it. He felt the weight of his own delay there. 50 years he had let slip by while the ring sat in a wooden chest in Bag End. Every time he turned a page, he felt the clock of the world ticking. He saw the names of kings who had failed, and he wondered if his own name would be added to that list. When he finally found the scroll, the ink faded and the parchment brittle. He read the words, "It is precious to me, though I buy it with great pain." In that moment, the tension in the world snapped. The mystery was over. The dread was now a certainty. The wait had ended, and the race had begun. He didn't leave the archives with a shout. He left with a silent, cold determination that changed the very vibration of his spirit. Before he could return to the Shire, there was one more piece of the puzzle that had to be found. Gollum Gandalf knew that if he could find the creature, he could find the truth of how the ring had travelled from the Gladden fields to the misty mountains. But Gollum was a shadow among shadows. For years, Gandalf and Aragorn hunted him through the vales of the Anduin and the outskirts of Mordor. Think of the patience required for such a hunt. They followed tracks that were weeks old, the broken twig, a disturbed patch of moss, the remains of a raw fish left on a stone. Gandalf used the birds and the beasts as his eyes, listening to the chatter of the crows and the silence of the wolves. He felt the darkness of Mordor growing. It was no longer a distant threat. It was a physical presence, a mountain of smoke that stained the southern sky. He walked the very fences of the Black Land, feeling the malice of the orcs and the watchful malice of the Nazgul. He was playing a game of hide-and-seek with death itself, when Gollum was finally caught. Gandalf's interrogation was not one of cruelty, but of a terrifying, burning light. He forced the creature to speak. He heard the names Shire and Baggins. He realized then that the secret was out. The wall he had built around the hobbits had been breached. The storm was no longer coming. It was at the door. Gandalf returned to the Shire for the final time before the great party. It was a beautiful summer, the kind of summer that feels as though it could last forever. The air was sweet with the scent of hay and honeysuckle, and the bees hummed a drowsy song in the clover. But for Gandalf, the beauty was heartbreaking. He looked at the hobbits, at Frodo, at Sam, at Pippin and Marianne. He saw them as lambs in a world of wolves. He saw the innocence of their lives, and he knew that he was about to shatter it. He spent those final months moving quietly through the Shire. He wasn't just setting off fireworks. He was studying the landscape for the last time as a place of peace. He was marking the paths they would need to take, the hiding places in the woods, the crossings of the rivers. He was a general surveying a battlefield that his soldiers didn't even know was a battlefield. He felt a profound, maternal protective urge toward the Shire. He had watched over it for so long, and now he had to lead the danger right to its heart. He sat on the bench outside Bag End with Frodo, watching the sun set over the hill, and he felt the immense weight of the ring sitting just a few feet away inside the house. It was like sitting next to a sleeping dragon. He was remarkably calm. The agitation of the previous years had settled into a cold, clear focus. He knew exactly what had to be done. He was no longer waiting for the signs. He was the sign. He was the spark that would ignite the fire of the West. As you drift toward the final shore of sleep, imagine the night before Bilbo's party. The tents are up, the lanterns are hung in the trees, and the Shire is filled with the excited whispers of a people who love a good story. Gandalf is alone in his small room at the inn, or perhaps walking the quiet lanes of Hobbiton. The air is cool and still. He looks up at the stars, the same stars he has watched for 2,000 years. He knows that by this time tomorrow, the world will have changed forever. The secrecy will be gone. The forgotten journeys will be over, and the one great journey will begin. He feels a strange sense of relief. The waiting is the hardest part of any war. The doubt, the looking for signs, the second-guessing, all of that is behind him. Now there is only the road. There is only the mission. Can you feel that transition? It is the moment when the diver stands at the edge of the cliff, looking at the dark water below. The heart beats fast, then slow, then settles into a steady rhythm. The world goes silent. There is only the breath, and then the leap. Gandalf is ready. He has made his mistakes, he has carried his regrets, and he has watched through the long night. He has prepared the king, he has found the ring, and he has warned the wise. He has done all that one spirit can do to set the stage. Now he must step into the fire. The fire in our hearth has become a bed of silver-white ash. The warmth is fading, leaving behind a cool, clean peace. The room is a sanctuary of absolute shadow. The years of preparation are over. The story, you know, is about to begin. But for tonight, the ring is still in its chest. The Nazgul are still far to the east. The Shire is still dreaming of cakes and ale. You can let go of the tension now. You do not need to move the pieces on the board. You do not need to watch the horizon. The grey pilgrim is there, standing at the edge of the Shire, his staff glowing with a soft, comforting light. He is watching over the small and the large, the fleeting and the eternal. Let your breath be like the night wind in scene, effortless and calm. The world is turning. The stars are shifting. The great design is unfolding exactly as it should. The fire has reached its final hour. There are no more flames to dance, only the deep, rhythmic pulse of the white asher-soft, glowing landscape that looks like the mountain peaks of the far west under a dying moon. The room is filled with a warmth that has become weightless, a gentle presence that wraps around you like the memory of a summer evening. Outside, the world has achieved a perfect stillness. The trees have stopped their whispering, and even the stars seem to hold their breath in the velvet vastness of the heavens. Tonight, we have reached the end of the long wandering. We have followed the footsteps of the grey pilgrim through 2,000 years of dust and starlight. We have seen the rise and fall of kingdoms that have no names left in the songs of men, and we have felt the weight of a silence that spanned centuries. But now, we sit with Gandalf on the most important night of all, the night before the first shadow falls upon the Shire, the night before the secret becomes a quest. Settle deeply into the pillows of your mind. Let your limbs grow heavy, like the stones of the earth. We are going to the quietest moment in the history of Middle-earth, the moment of acceptance. Imagine Gandalf standing on the bridge at the end of Hobbiton. It is a late hour, long after the last lights of the hill have been extinguished. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp earth, river reeds, and the faint, sweet ghost of pipeweed from the gardens of the Underhills. He leans upon his staff of ash, his grey cloak blending into the silver mists that rise from the water. To any passer-by, he would be nothing more than a weathered stone or a trick of the moonlight. But inside, his mind is a vast library of memories, being sorted one last time before the door is locked forever. He listens to the sound of the water passing under the bridge. It is a soft, gurgling music, the same sound that has played here for centuries of Hobbit. He feels a profound tenderness for this place. In all his wanderings, among the high lords of Gondor, the shipwrights of the havens, and the fierce riders of the market, is this small, unassuming patch of green that has captured his heart. He realizes, with a gentle sorrow, that this is the last night the Shire will ever be truly innocent. By tomorrow, the shadow will have a name. The ring will have a destination. The peace he has guarded with such fierce, quiet dedication for so long is about to be broken by his own hand. He is the one who must bring the fire to the garden. In the deep silence of this watch, Gandalf looks back. He looks back at the day he stepped off the ship at the Grey Havens and felt the first sting of the salt spray. He remembers the face of Círdan and the weight of the red ring as it was first pressed into his palm. He remembers the names of the friends. He has lost the kings whose crowns he helped forge, and the simple men whose graves he marked with a single white stone. He thinks of the blue wizards in the east and wonders if they are looking at the same stars tonight. Wherever they may be, he does not feel regret tonight. The quiet regrets we spoke of before have been folded away, like old letters. He understands now that every mistake, every delay, and every missed sign was a part of the greater weaving. If he had found the ring earlier, perhaps the world would not have been ready. If he had been more powerful, perhaps he would have been more corruptible. He accepts his flaws as the very tools that allow him to succeed. His humility, his love for the small, his willingness to be a fool for the sake of hope. These are the things that have brought him to this bridge. He sees the long line of his life, not as a series of disconnected journeys, but as a single, steady march toward this moment. He feels a great peace in this realization. The struggle of the wait is over. He no longer has to wonder when the storm will come. The storm is here, and he is ready to be the lightning. His thoughts drift to the house on the hill to Bag End. He can feel the ring there, sitting in the dark, a tiny, heavy knot in the fabric of the world. It is a cold, piercing presence, like a splinter of ice in the heart of a summer night. He thinks of Frodo, sleeping in his bed, unaware of the burden that is already claiming him. Gandalf feels a pang of fatherly grief. He knows the road that lies ahead for the hobbit. He knows the cold of the high passes and the heat of the fireman. He knows that Frodo will never truly come back to this shire, even if he returns to its soil. But he also feels a profound trust. He has spent centuries studying the hearts of the small, and he knows something that the Dark Lord in his high tower will never understand, that the most fragile things are often the most unbreakable. He trusts the goodness of the earth. He trusts the resilience of the humble. He looks at the ring, not with fear, but with a cold, clear defiance. It is a work of great malice, but it is still a work of hands. It is finite. It has a beginning, and it will have an end. Gandalf, the servant of the secret fire, knows that even the darkest shadow is only a temporary blockage of the light. The final stillness is. The night moves toward its deepest point. The hour of the wolf and the owl, Gandalf enters a state of meditative stillness. He stops being a wizard, a messenger, or a guardian. He simply is. He breathes in the air of Middle-earth, the air he has breathed for 2,000 years. He feels the life in the soil beneath his boots, the roots of the trees drinking from the dark water, the small creatures burrowed in the banks of the river. He feels the connectivity of all things. He realizes that he is not alone. He is part of a great choir, a song that began before the world was made and will continue after the sun has gone cold. He is just a single note in that song, but he will play his part with every ounce of his being. Can you feel that stillness? It is the peace of a mountain that has withstood 1,000 winters. It is the calm of the deep sea, far below the churning of the waves. It is a peace that passes all understanding, a gift from the west to the spirit that has remained true. He takes one last, long look at the Shire. He memorizes the curve of the hill, the smell of the damp grass, the way the stars reflect in the slow-moving water. He tucks these things away in his heart, a small treasure to carry into the fire. He is ready to lose everything he loves to save the world that holds it. The first hint of the coming. Dawn begins to grey the eastern horizon. The birds have not yet begun their song, but the air has lost its biting chill. The transition is beginning. Gandalf straightens his back. The ache in his bones, the weariness of the centuries, seems to fall away. He feels a new strength, strength that comes not from his own power, but from the rightness of his purpose. He knows that from this moment on, there will be no more quiet years. There will be no more wandering the ruins in peace. There will be no more secret meetings by the sea. The time for hiding is over. The grey pilgrim is stepping out of the shadows and into the pages of the legends. He feels a strange, quiet joy. It is the joy of the traveller who finally sees the gate of his destination. The destination is not a place, but a destiny. He is the bridge. He is the guide. He is the fire that kindles. He turns away from the water and begins the walk back up the hill toward Bag End. His footsteps are silent on the grass. He does not look back. He has said his goodbyes to the past. He is moving toward the future with a heart that is wide open and a mind that is as clear as a mountain spring as you drift now into the final embrace of sleep. Let the image of the grey pilgrim be your companion. He is no longer a figure of mystery or fear. He is the friend who has walked the long road so that you don't have to. He is the watcher who has stayed awake through the 2,000-year night so that you can sleep in safety. The history of his forgotten journeys is now a part of you. You carry the golden grass of the East in your dreams. You carry the salt of the grey havens in your breath. You carry the silence of the hidden kingdoms in your heart. The story is about to begin, but that is a story for another time. Tonight, the world is still. The quest is waiting at the threshold, but it will not cross it until the sun rises. For now, there is only the peace of the accomplishment. There is only the warmth of the mission fulfilled. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the bed, as if you were being cradled by the very soil of the Shire. The earth is warm and welcoming. The air is a soft caress. The darkness is a protective cloak, woven by the hands of those who love the light. Gandalf has reached the door. He pauses for a moment, his hand on the wood. He looks back at the world one last time, a smile of infinite peace hidden in his beard. He is at home in his destiny, and you, too, are at home. The journey of the day is done. The wandering is over. The stars are fading into the light of a new, hopeful dawn. But for you, the night is a long, beautiful valley of rest. The fire has gone out. The room is cool and quiet, held in the perfect, silver light of the pre-dawn. The grey pilgrim is at rest in his purpose. The world is safe in its transition. The stories are all told. And the silence that remains is the most beautiful story of all. Let your thoughts fade like the mist over the Bruinen. Let your worries dissolve like the smoke from a wizard's pipe. You are part of the great song, and tonight, your part is to be still. Your part is to be at peace. The road goes ever on, but for now, it stops at your bedside. The mountains are sleeping. The forests are dreaming. The great sea is a mirror of the stars. Rest now, traveller of the mind. The history is safe.